Well, I'll jump in. On the first question, are they both part of the same larger issue? I guess it depends on how large the large issue is. I see some differences between a deer call that is totally related to the fact that humans are inconvenienced or are concerned about how deer impact them versus what seems to be a disease that is not related to humans. So
Can we change that to Lyme disease? Rather wasting disease, that's the same question.
A zoonotic disease is what she's saying, one that people get, so it hits closer to home.
well, what I'm saying is that I see a difference. Yeah, we can change it to that, and I don't think that there's evidence, at least if you're talking about Ann Arbor, that there was a problem with Lyme disease,
No,
or that the
I'm
fall
not
can.
But also the question is, why should we wait until Lyme disease comes to Ann Arbor? Because it's in northern Ohio,
It's here.
it's in western Michigan. It's moving in that direction, so why wait until it's endemic? Which then makes all those little devices you were talking about, the little tubes and stuff, necessary. But why not try to keep it out?
I think that there's a difference of opinion about how likely that is to happen. And we don't, to me, I don't think we kill our way out of any possible problem or disease that's happening.
What is the suggestion then of the solution? Based on science rather than your opinion.
Well,
What the science will tell you about Lyme disease is deer are hosts for the tick, they are the reservoir for the disease. But once the tick and the disease are well established in the community, it doesn't matter whether you have deer or not. Because, as I think Jill said, many birds and mammals will carry the disease and they will host the tick. So once it's well established, whether we're talking about culling deer or not is probably not an important question with respect to Lyme disease.
At the same time, I have another study from Connecticut, which says the exact opposite of what Jill said. So,
Yeah, I have seen some studies where you get it down to, well, specifically the one island off of Maine where they eliminated the deer off the island. And immediately, that was the last reported case of Lyme disease on the island, and it was running something like 17% of people had Lyme disease in the island, and they had no further cases of Lyme disease after the deer removed. So you can remove the deer and remove the disease.
well, to the person's comment about science, this brings up a good point about science. There's not just one science that everyone agrees on that shows one specific thing and one specific result. So just saying let's rely on science is not.
Well, let's
doesn't
say
answer
good science then. You have a bunch of scientists here that are researchers, myself included, and we're talking biology and facts and sound science, not opinion and, you know, my feelings. But I understand that wildlife management requires taking into consideration people's feelings and their
Well,
values of
I
the.
just pointed out that we have several wildlife biologists and scientists working on our projects as well.
And you said in their opinion, they said it didn't work. I wrote it down when you said that.
Yeah.
They haven't published it and shown it
They haven't?
as sound science. Yes,
No.
they have not.
Oh, really? Please enlighten me that our scientists
Well,
have not published
show us the
reports.
scientific journal references. Porcine zonapalooza, the vaccine has failed miserably trying to manage the burros and horses out west. There's more in captivity now in taxpayer-funded rescue centers than there are in the wild. And it's just that when you say how much it can do, you also got to consider what it costs. Where's the reference? That's what I asked.
So in the,
Go.
I'm looking at a paper right now in population and community ecology from Connecticut, where they already had established Lyme disease, and they said reducing the deer density to 5 deer per square kilometer, 76% reduction in tick abundance, 80% reduction in reported cases of Lyme disease in the community. And so I'm trying to understand why that is. Is that because we have these incredibly dense deer populations where people in Ann Arbor, they'll see like 6 to 10 deer in their backyards? Is that because those ticks are dropping off and there's just more deer interacting with, more deer ticks interacting with people? So I'm trying to understand this connection between deer density and Lyme disease. I know that the deer are not a reservoir for Lyme disease. They're important in the tick's life history, and they must be important for the population growth rates of the ticks, and also where they're established near people. So there must be some impact between Lyme disease and deer density. Does anybody know the answer to that?
You know, deer tickles, robins, mice, everything out there with red blood cells. He's probably providing a blood meal for an adult female tick.
Including
So if you, what I'm asking, I guess, is what are the incidents, how many ticks are you likely to come across in the landscape if you're a low density deer as opposed to a high density deer? Because we know that they'll still be in the landscape, not necessarily, those ticks are necessarily interacting with humans a lot. If they're just on raccoons, they're just on birds.
Population, because the adult tick is going to get its blood meal from a larger mammal, where it's getting the nymph or the young stage, or whatever they call that stage for the tick, is typically picking up the spirochete from the small mammals, the chipmunks and the white-footed mice. In my mind, it makes perfect sense that if you reduce the deer population, so long as you're not supplementing it with added hikers or walkers or something to replace that, the adult ticks would eventually not have the quote-unquote habitat and eventually would start falling off, and you would start to see a reduction, and maybe not a percentage in the nymph population that's infected, but certainly in the amount that grow to be adults, and then you have, you know, a subsequent decline in Lyme disease. I don't know if that's true or not, but that seems to make a lot of sense, and I have seen some contradictory papers that say one thing and some say another. I think the bottom line is we still have a lot more to learn about the relationship between ticks, Lyme disease, and deer. I think we're still working on that.
What about the spread of Lyme disease? Is that exactly what's going to bring it closer into Ann Arbor? Or is it most likely to be moved around by birds or other animals in terms of the movement of the ticks?
There are major studies underway right now. In fact, we have one going on here at MSU looking at explicitly that question. And I don't think the results are in.
But the deer will travel further than the mouse or the squirrel probably at any one time.
That's a good question. What is the vector? Vectors can be complex sometimes.
I saw your hand up over here. Go ahead.
This is changing the subject a little bit, but what is the impact to the human population of chronic wasting? Of what?
Kind of wasting things.
Of chronic wasting.
To date, there's been no cases of humans contracting chronic wasting disease.
What about other animals, like
It is
cows?
right. It is right now. It's CWD is considered a deer-specific disease, so it will affect white-tailed deer, mule deer, elk, moose. But it's part of a family of diseases called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. And I'm going to say that as TSEs because I don't want to say those words again. But these TSEs can be found pretty much in most mammals. So cows have their own case of TSE, and it's called mad cow disease. And obviously that has jumped from cows to humans. because there are about 200 people in England that you can't tell that to anymore because they're dead, back in the late 80s and early 90s. So we don't have proof of this CWD jumping from humans, but I always say absence of proof does not mean proof of absence. So, the primary concern with managing CWD right now is the long-term impacts of the white-tailed deer herd, because as Dr. Porter mentioned, once it becomes established and you have that environmental contamination, it's going to accumulate in your deer herd, and it's going to basically exponentially accumulate over time. And as it exponentially accumulates, you're going to see a reduction in your deer herd. And that's obviously something that we're very concerned about.
Go ahead. My concern is mostly for biodiversity. And the Humane Society, they recommend using deterrents to keep the deer out, fencing and sprays and this and that can be somewhat effective for a homeowner. But my question to you is, there's nobody doing that for the natural areas in the parks. So basically then that means that you're just going to destroy the habitat in the parkland, or what would you recommend for that? And I guess overall, I'm just going to relate to you as a person now, not as an agency or one side or the other. This is a good opportunity for me to just ask you. I guess I just don't understand why people say they want to have a humane approach for the deer. Great, I'm glad. But what about all the other species? I don't understand why the compassion, the humanity doesn't extend to the things that the deer are either they're eating because they're planned or destroying the habitat of.
Well, I think Dee kind of asked that question too. In her slide, she said essentially the question is, who are the others we choose to care about?
For instance,
And I mean, that includes
Michigan,
one species here that we're talking about, but
just
neglecting the other ones.
Yeah, neglecting it, like the Michigan, I don't think that
By the urban planner,
But we've never gone to a meeting, planning meeting. We went to council meetings, we never went to planning meetings ever.
but that doesn't make his point invalid.
His point was not well informed. Let me just put it charitably that way.
Well,
You're
if
saying
you're talking about opinions, that's, if what we're doing here is saying that whatever studies support my point of view and studies which don't support my point of view are either wrong or somebody's opinion, then we're not going to get very far if we're trying to understand and try to unpack some of the controversies and heated emotions that this generates. So as I was saying earlier, as far as science, and clearly I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer, so I don't pretend I was invited because we wanted a larger perspective. But just saying, my point is, just saying let science decide is not the answer, because scientists have come up with different opinions or different conclusions on things. And if all we're going to do is say, I'm going to, cherry pick the studies that support me, then that doesn't help move anything along. That's what Jonathan's study did.
Let's look at Rochester Hills, because the Humane Society has regularly brought up Rochester Hills as a local example of a successful approach to deer management through encouraging people to drive sensibly. Now you point to a dramatic drop in deer vehicle collisions, which is, again, part of the humane issue that Nancy is reading. Part of the drop came from an outbreak of episodic hemorrhagic disease, okay? And that is according to the naturalist, Lance DeVoe, okay? And that was the reason for that dramatic drop in population in 2012, okay?
And
The population
population
here
which called, yeah.
which then,
Right.
yeah, okay, thank you, Bernie. Yeah, so, but my next question gets to this whole issue of humane. I mean, this paradigm of Rochester Hills tolerates up to 200 deer vehicle collisions a year. before a call will be triggered. Now, how is killing deer with a car more humane than with a bullet to the head?
Well, and as I mentioned, that what we have found with the studies is that having a cull of the deer is not necessarily going to affect how many deer-car collisions there are. So this either or, either a bullet or the head, if I could finish,